Hello, my name is Tom Harrington, 31 years old. I live in a small but cozy apartment in Brooklyn, New York, where the windows overlook bustling streets where neon lights and the sound of car horns blend into an endless symphony of the city. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I would never have thought I'd choose a place like this to live. I was born into a wealthy family raised in the opulent hallways of the Harrington Mansion in the Hamptons, where everything gleamed and appeared perfect, at least on the surface. But life, as I've learned, is never as simple as it seems. And my story, the story of the Harrington family and our billion-dollar energy empire, is the clearest testament to that. Let me take you back, not too far, just a few years ago, when I was still part of that world, the world of expensive suits, lavish charity galas, and fake smiles hiding the sharp blades of rivalry. I am the grandson of William Harrington, the modern founder of Harrington Energy, an empire in the renewable energy industry, from solar panels to wind turbines, with assets spanning across the United States and Europe. My grandfather, at 85, was a revered man with sharp eyes and a warm, resonant voice that always made you feel as though you were being guided by a lighthouse in a storm. He was the only person in the family who made me feel like I belonged, even though I always knew I didn't truly fit in. My family, how should I put it, is like a chess game where every player wants to be king. My father, Robert Harrington, 58, is the CEO of the corporation, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a cold smile. He's ambitious, but his ambition often outstrips his vision. I still remember the times he stood before the board, his voice booming, but his eyes always gliding past me as if I were merely a shadow. He never thought I was good enough, strong enough to follow in his footsteps. Lacking experience, he'd often say right in front of my colleagues, his tone like a sentencing. Then there's Aunt Elizabeth, 55, the CFO, who always felt to me like a snake silently coiled in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She's sharp, frighteningly intelligent, but her intelligence is used more for manipulation than for building. Uncle Charles, 60, the director of business development, is like a volcano, always ready to erupt. The arguments between him and Elizabeth during meetings often silenced the room. Not out of fear, but because everyone knew they were quietly plotting to destroy each other. And finally, there's Aunt Margaret, 52, the marketing director, who always appears with a perfect smile and sweet words. But I quickly learned her friendliness was just a mask. She walks a fine line, exploiting both sides to solidify her position. My mother, Laura, is a different story. She divorced my father when I was young and has since lived in France, far removed from the Harrington family drama. I rarely hear from her except for birthday cards that arrive right on time with a few short but warm lines. I don't blame her. Perhaps leaving was the only way she could keep her peace. And me? I'm not sure where I fit into this picture. From a young age, I was groomed to be part of the Harrington legacy, but I didn't want to be just a name in the lineage. I wanted to do something meaningful, not just for money or power. After graduating with an MBA from Harvard, I joined Harrington Energy as a project manager, bringing big ideas about improving energy technology, from high-efficiency solar panels to smart grid management software. I thought I could change the corporation, turn it into a symbol of sustainability and responsibility. But I soon realized that in my family, personal ambition always trumped the greater good. My early days at the corporation were far from easy. I remember one board meeting when I presented a plan to develop a new line of solar panels, cheaper and more efficient. I had spent months working with the engineering team, checking every number, every detail. When I finished my presentation, the room fell silent. I thought it was a sign of being impressed. But then my father spoke, his voice icy. "You think a few numbers on paper can change an entire industry, Tom? You need more than that to sit at this table." A chuckle came from Elizabeth's direction, and Charles just shook his head, as if I'd told a joke not worth hearing. Only my grandfather, seated at the head of the table, looked at me with encouraging eyes, though he said nothing. Moments like that weren't rare. My father never missed a chance to publicly criticize me, calling me a dreamer or William's spoiled grandson. Elizabeth and Charles were more subtle. They assigned me to nearly impossible projects, like managing a wind turbine plant in rural Mexico, where outdated infrastructure and difficult local partners constantly created obstacles. They wanted me to fail, to prove I wasn't worthy of my grandfather's favor. Margaret, meanwhile, always acted friendly, patting my shoulder and offering words of encouragement, but I knew she was spreading rumors behind my back, suggesting I was just coasting on the family name. I tried. I really did. I worked myself to exhaustion, staying up late to finish reports, flying across time zones to meet partners, and trying to stay strong amid the whispers. But with each passing day, I felt more like I was fighting my own family rather than working toward the grand vision I once dreamed of. They didn't just undermine me. They undermined each other. My father wanted to seize my grandfather's chairmanship. Elizabeth schemed to consolidate shares by wooing smaller shareholders. Charles sought alliances with external partners to bolster his power. And Margaret, like a seasoned actress, used the media to craft her image as the face of Harrington Energy. I began to wonder, is this really my family, or just a group of strangers bound by money and power? My grandfather was the only light in that darkness. Every time I visited him at the Hamptons mansion, he'd pull me into the library where walnut bookshelves stretched to the ceiling and the scent of old paper mingled with his cologne. He'd sit in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, and tell me about the early days of building Harrington Energy. "We don't just sell energy, Tom," he said, his eyes lighting up. "We bring hope, a cleaner future. But to do that, you have to be stronger than what they think of you." He believed in me, believed I could carry on his legacy, not just because I was his grandson, but because he saw in me something the rest of the family had lost: integrity. But even my grandfather couldn't protect me forever. 2 years ago, his health began to decline. Heart attacks landed him in the hospital multiple times, and I noticed he appeared less and less at meetings. His absence was like a gaping void, and my family, like vultures, began circling his throne. I could feel the shift in the air, as if a storm was coming, but I was powerless to stop it. The breaking point came one autumn evening as I sat in my office at Harrington Energy's Manhattan headquarters. I had just finished a 50-page report on a smart grid project, something I believed could elevate the corporation to new heights. But when I sent it to my father, he replied with a curt email: "Not feasible. Focus on the tasks I assigned. Don't waste time." I stared at the screen, feeling like the fire inside me had been extinguished. It wasn't the first time, but it was the final straw. I stood up, stepped onto the balcony, and looked down at the stream of traffic below. New York City, with all its chaos and brilliance, seemed to be calling me. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a game I didn't want to play. I was 29, and I wanted to live for myself, not for my family's expectations or their legacy. I returned to my desk, wrote a brief resignation letter, and sent it to my father, Elizabeth, Charles, and Margaret. I didn't send it to my grandfather. I couldn't face him, not because I feared his disappointment, but because I feared he'd convince me to stay. My family's reaction was predictable. My father called me the next morning, his voice dripping with contempt. "What do you think you can do out there, Tom? You're just a quitter." Elizabeth and Charles didn't bother to respond, but I heard rumors that they called me a traitor to the legacy. Margaret sent a long message full of cliches about respecting my choice, but I knew she was thrilled to see a potential rival exit the game. Only my grandfather called me to the Hamptons estate a few days later. He wasn't angry or reproachful. He just looked at me, his eyes tired but still bright, and said, "You have your own path, Tom. But don't forget, this legacy is part of you no matter where you go." I nodded, holding back tears, and promised not to let him down. I left Harrington Energy and started over. I joined a green tech startup in Brooklyn where I worked with passionate people who didn't care who I was or where I came from. We developed energy management tools, helping cities optimize their grids and reduce emissions. For the first time, I felt like I was doing something meaningful, Not for fame or fortune, but because it was right. I began building my own reputation, and though life wasn't as glamorous as it was in the Hamptons, I felt free. But deep down, I know my story with my family isn't over. My grandfather is still there, growing weaker, and I can't shake my feeling that something big, something daunting awaits ahead. I tried to live my life, focusing on the startup in Brooklyn, on long days working with the engineering team, and on peaceful nights with Emily, my wife, and our little daughter, Lily. But every time the phone rang with a number from the Hamptons, my heart would pound, as if bracing for news I didn't want to hear. And then, on a cold winter morning, that news arrived, not from my family, but from an old friend, and it shattered my entire world. I was sitting in the small office of the startup, the dim light from the window casting a glow on my computer screen, where I was reviewing a demo of new energy management software. My phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen. A message from Daniel, my best friend from college, now a businessman in New York's elite circles. "Tom, I just heard. Your grandfather passed away. I'm so sorry. Call me if you need anything." I read the message over and over as if the words weren't real. My heart felt like it stopped, and the room suddenly became stifling. Grandfather? Gone? No, it couldn't be. I had spoken to him just last week. His voice was weak but still warm, asking about my work, about Lily. He even promised to visit Brooklyn when he felt better. How could he be gone so suddenly? I dialed my father's number, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped the phone. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Tom?" His voice was cold, devoid of emotion, as if he were answering a business call. "What is it?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just heard about Grandfather. Is it true, Dad? Is he gone?" There was a pause, then he replied, his tone flat. "Yes. William passed last night. Heart attack." I waited, hoping he'd say something, that the family was arranging the funeral, that I needed to come to the Hamptons immediately, that Grandfather had mentioned me before he passed. But there was nothing. Only a follow-up sentence, sharp as a knife. "The family has met and decided you don't need to attend the funeral. We'll handle everything. Don't complicate things." Then he hung up. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone droning like a hollow refrain. Don't need to attend the funeral. Don't complicate things. I was his grandson, the one he cherished most, the one he'd spent his life mentoring and believing in. How could they shut me out like this? I called back, but no one answered. I texted Elizabeth, Charles, and Margaret. No response. I even called Edward Klein, my grandfather's longtime butler, who had always treated me like a true member of the family. But he only said, his voice stiff, "I'm sorry, Master Tom, but I'm just following orders. You're not allowed to come." It felt like the ground beneath me collapsed. My family, the people I'd once tried to please, hoped to change, had completely turned their backs on me. But I couldn't accept it. Not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I needed to say goodbye to my grandfather. I needed to stand before his coffin, see him one last time, and promise I wouldn't let him down. I texted Emily, telling her I had to go to the Hamptons immediately. She called back, her voice laced with worry. "Tom, I'm not sure this is a good idea. They've made it clear they don't want you there. I'm afraid they'll hurt you." I knew she was right, but I couldn't stay put. "You don't understand," I said, my voice choking. "Grandfather was the only one who believed in me. I have to go, whether they want me there or not." Emily was silent for a moment, then said, "All right. But be careful, and call me if anything happens." I promised, but we both knew I was heading into a storm. I drove for over 3 hours from Brooklyn to the Hamptons, through roads blanketed in snow. The Harrington mansion loomed ahead with its marble columns and perfectly trimmed cypress trees. But today, it no longer held the warmth of my memories. It felt like a cold fortress, a place I once belonged to but was now banished from. The main gate was wide open and I saw dozens of luxury cars lining the driveway. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and Mercedes belonging to the elite, here to pay their respects to William Harrington. But I didn't care about them. I just wanted to get inside, to have one moment to say goodbye. I parked at the gate, and a tall security guard stepped forward. I recognized him, Joe, who had worked for the family since I was a kid. "Joe," I said, forcing a smile. "I need to get in. I'm Tom, William's grandson." He looked at me, his eyes full of discomfort, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Master Tom. I have orders not to let you in, from Mr. Robert and Ms. Elizabeth." I felt a rush of heat to my head. "Orders? This is my grandfather's funeral. You can't stop me." I stepped forward, trying to push past, but two more guards appeared, blocking my path. One of them put a hand on my shoulder, his voice firm. "Don't make this harder for us, Mr. Harrington. You need to leave now." I turned back, and through the gate I saw familiar faces. Shareholders, partners, people who used to call me Young Tom when I was a child. They were staring at me, whispering to each other, and I knew what they were thinking. Tom Harrington, the traitor, the quitter, daring to show up here. I saw my father near the main entrance, dressed in a black suit, talking to a group of guests. He glanced my way, his eyes cold, then turned away as if I didn't exist. Elizabeth stood nearby, a fake smile playing on her lips as if she were relishing the scene. Charles and Margaret were somewhere out of sight, but I knew they supported this decision. My family had united to erase me, and that hurt more than any insult I'd ever endured. "You can't do this," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Grandfather was the only one who believed in me. You have no right to stop me." But Joe just shook his head, his voice almost pleading. "Please, Master Tom, don't make us use force." I stood there, my breath forming clouds in the cold air, feeling like my heart was shattering. I wanted to charge in, to confront my father, Elizabeth, to scream that they didn't deserve my grandfather's legacy. But I knew it was futile. They had won, at least for today. I turned back to my car, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I was too broken to. On the drive back to Brooklyn, I was numb. Memories of my grandfather flooded back piece by piece, like fragments of a picture I never wanted to forget. I remembered afternoons in the library when he'd tell me about the early days of building Harrington Energy, when he was just a young engineer with a dream to change the world. "Money and power are just tools, Tom," he'd said, his eyes blazing. "What matters is what you leave behind for the next generation." I remembered the time he took me to a wind turbine farm in Texas when I was 12. He pointed to the massive blades spinning in the wind and said, "One day, you'll lead all of this. But you have to be stronger than what they think of you." When I got back to the apartment, it was already dark. Emily was waiting, her eyes full of worry. "Are you okay?" she asked, but I just shook my head and hugged her tightly. Lily was asleep, and I stepped into her room, looking at my daughter's angelic face in the soft glow of her nightlight. I sat by her bed, overwhelmed by helplessness. I had lost my grandfather, the only one who believed in me, and now my family had erased me from their world. I didn't know what to do next, how to move forward. I walked into the living room, and my eyes landed on a photo on the bookshelf, a family picture my grandfather had given me during my last visit. It was taken at the Hamptons mansion during a summer party years ago. My grandfather stood in the center, a rare smile on his face, and I stood beside him, 25 years old, full of passion and naivety. My father, Elizabeth, Charles, and Margaret were all there, but their smiles weren't genuine. I picked up the photo, my fingers tracing my grandfather's face, and a sharp pain stabbed my chest. "I'm sorry, grandfather," I whispered. "I wasn't there when you needed me." I set the photo down, but it slipped from my hands and fell to the floor, the glass frame shattering. As I bent to pick it up, I noticed something inside the frame, a small, folded piece of paper tucked behind the backing. My heart raced as I opened it. It was a handwritten letter in my grandfather's familiar script. The first line took my breath away. "Tom, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. but I need you to know the truth. I slumped onto the sofa, the letter trembling in my hands. The dim light in the living room illuminated the words as if they were alive, recounting the story my grandfather had kept hidden. I read on, each word piercing my heart like a dagger. I have left all my shares of Harrington Energy, 51% to you, Tom. I believe you are the only one who can protect the family's legacy, not just for profit, but for the values I built it upon. But I fear that my children, Robert, Elizabeth, Charles, Margaret, along with the lawyer Henry Voss and the butler Edward Klein, are manipulating me. They monitor my every move, isolating me from the outside world. I suspect the official will may be forged. This letter is my final proof. Check my fingerprint in the bottom right corner. It's the mark to verify the truth. I looked at the corner of the letter, and sure enough, there was a faint but clear fingerprint inked in black. My heart pounded, threatening to burst from my chest. My grandfather had known. He knew the family would betray him, betray me, and he had left this clue hidden in the photo he gave me during our last visit. I stood up, pacing the living room, the letter still clutched tightly in my hand. The pain of my grandfather's death now mingled with anger and determination. They thought they could steal his legacy, steal the trust he placed in me. But they were wrong. I wouldn't let them win. I would fight, not just for myself, but for my grandfather, for what he built, for the words he once told me. You have to be stronger than what they think of you. Emily walked in, her eyes filled with concern as she saw my dazed expression. Tom, what's wrong? She asked, her voice soft but full of care. I handed her the letter, and as she read, her eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. My God, Tom, this is... Your grandfather left everything to you? I nodded, my voice hoarse. But my family. They forged the will, they stole it. I need to do something. Emily took my hand, her gaze steady. We will, but you can't do this alone. We need help. The next morning, I called Daniel, my best friend, who had informed me of my grandfather's passing. Daniel was a successful entrepreneur with connections in New York's elite and legal circles. I met him at a small cafe in Manhattan where no one would recognize me as Tom Harrington. I showed him the letter, and his face grew increasingly grave as he read. Tom, this is a bombshell, he said, his voice low. If what your grandfather wrote is true, your family didn't just forge the will. They could be guilty of criminal acts, but you need evidence. This letter is a start, but it's not enough to take to court. Daniel introduced me to Sarah Cohen, a renowned independent lawyer in New York who specialized in complex inheritance disputes. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, exuded a quiet intensity. When I handed her the letter and recounted the entire story, from being sidelined at the corporation to leaving, to being barred from the funeral, to my grandfather's letter, she nodded, scribbling notes quickly in her notebook. This is a big case, Tom, she said, but I need you to understand that your family won't let go easily. They have money, power, and top lawyers. Are you ready to take them on? I looked her in the eye, feeling a fire ignite within me. I don't have a choice. My grandfather believed in me. I can't let him down. Sarah gave a faint smile as if she'd just found an ally. All right. First step, we need to verify the fingerprint on the letter. Then I'll request the court to reopen the official will. But we'll need more evidence of the forgery. I recommend hiring a private investigator. I agreed, and Sarah introduced me to Jack Riley, a seasoned private investigator with salt and pepper hair and a gravelly voice that suggested he'd lived through countless dark stories. Jack didn't talk much, but his eyes showed he knew his craft. I'll start with Edward Klein and Henry Voss, he said, jotting notes in his pad. If they were monitoring your grandfather as he wrote, there'll be a trail. I'll also check the will announced at the funeral. Do you remember who presented it? I nodded. Henry Voss. He's the family lawyer, always loyal to my father and Elizabeth. While Jack began his investigation, I couldn't sit still. I returned to the startup, but my mind was elsewhere. Every night I sat in the living room rereading my grandfather's letter, searching for more clues. Emily was my anchor. Not only did she provide emotional support, but she also used her skills as an environmental journalist to dig for information. She contacted sources in the energy industry who had worked with Harrington Energy and discovered that the corporation was in serious trouble. Its stock had plummeted 60% in 2 years, major partners were pulling out, and the media was questioning my father's and aunt's and uncle's leadership. A week later, Jack called me to his office in Queens, a small room heavy with the scent of coffee and tobacco. He tossed a stack of documents onto the desk, his eyes resolute. "You'll want to see this," he said. I opened the file and what I saw chilled me. Jack had uncovered emails between Henry Voss and Elizabeth discussing amendments to my grandfather's will before his death. There was also a recording from a former employee of Henry's, confirming he'd been bribed by my father and Elizabeth to legitimize the forged will. But what shocked me most was Jack's report on Edward Klein, my grandfather's butler. Edward hadn't just reported my grandfather's meetings to Elizabeth. He'd installed listening devices in his room. "Your grandfather was practically a prisoner in his own home," Jack said, his voice laced with contempt. "They didn't want him contacting you or anyone who could disrupt their plans." I gripped the documents, feeling my blood boil. "What did they do to him?" I whispered, unsure if I was asking Jack or myself. Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "I know you're angry, Tom, but we need to stay calm. This evidence is strong, but your family will fight back. They'll do anything to protect their shares and reputation." I contacted Sarah immediately, and she agreed we had enough to take the case to court. But she warned me. "Your family will hire the best lawyers. They'll try to discredit you, claim you're fabricating this to seize the company. You need to be prepared." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't afraid. Not because I was confident, but because I knew I was doing the right thing. I was fighting for my grandfather, for his legacy, and for myself. While Sarah prepared the legal filings, Jack continued his investigation and found a key witness. Clara, my grandfather's private nurse during his final months. Clara, a woman in her 50s with sad eyes, agreed to meet me at a small diner in Long Island. She held my hand, her voice trembling as she recounted what she'd seen. "Mr. William was a good man, Tom," she said, "but he was isolated. Edward wouldn't let him make calls, and every time you visited, he was watched. Once he tried to write something for you, but Elizabeth showed up and took it away. He knew they were plotting, and he was so worried about you." I felt tears welling up, but I held them back. "Do you have any proof, Clara?" I asked. She nodded, pulling out a notebook. I wrote everything down, dates, times, what I saw, what he said. I knew you'd need it someday. With evidence from Jack, Clara, and my grandfather's letter, Sarah filed a petition in a New York court to reopen William Harrington's official will. The news spread quickly and the media took notice. Emily helped me connect with trusted reporters who wrote about Harrington Energy's decline and the suspicions surrounding the will. Public pressure forced my family to respond. My father held a press conference at the company's headquarters, declaring I was an opportunist exploiting my grandfather's death to seize power. Elizabeth appeared on television, her fake smile intact, saying I had abandoned the family long ago and had no right to interfere. Charles and Margaret stayed silent, but I knew they were quietly rallying shareholders against me. The trial was a nightmare. I sat in the courtroom facing my family, my father, Elizabeth, Charles, Margaret, and their legal team led by a tall man named Richard Hayes, known for turning cases around. Sarah presented the evidence. My grandfather's letter, the fingerprint, Henry Voss's emails, Jack's reports, and Clara's testimony. I watched my family as the evidence was revealed. My father clenched his fists, his eyes blazing with anger. Elizabeth maintained a composed expression, but I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. Charles muttered something to Margaret, who kept her head down, avoiding my gaze. Richard Hayes countered, calling me a disgruntled quitter who left the company due to incompetence. He produced old documents, reports my father had once criticized me for, to prove I was unfit to lead. He even suggested my grandfather's letter was forged, claiming I'd hired someone to fake the fingerprint. But Sarah didn't flinch. She presented a forensic report confirming the fingerprint was my grandfather's and called Clara to the witness stand. As Clara recounted my grandfather's final days, her voice breaking, the courtroom fell silent. I looked at my father, hoping for a hint of remorse, but he stared straight ahead, as if deaf to her words. The trial lasted 3 weeks, each day a grueling challenge. My family spread rumors claiming I was sabotaging the Harrington name out of spite. Some smaller shareholders loyal to my father called to threaten me. But surprisingly, many major shareholders who had worked with my grandfather began supporting me. They were frustrated with my father's and aunts' and uncles' poor management, the losses and internal scandals. Daniel helped me meet with them, and I convinced them I wasn't just fighting for the shares. I wanted to save Harrington Energy, to restore it to its glory under my grandfather's leadership. Finally, on a March afternoon, the judge delivered the verdict. Based on the evidence presented, including the handwritten letter of Mr. William Harrington, the authenticated fingerprint and witness testimony, this court declares the will presented by attorney Henry Voss on December 15th to be fraudulent. The original will, bequeathing 51% of Harrington Energy to Mr. Thomas Harrington, is recognized as legally valid. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I sat there, unable to believe my ears. Sarah squeezed my hand, smiling. "We did it, Tom." I looked at my family. My father stood, his face flushed, and stormed out without a word. Elizabeth glared at me, her eyes full of hatred, then followed him. Charles shook his head while Margaret kept her gaze lowered as if acknowledging defeat. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, and a part of me still ached seeing my family fall apart like this. After the trial, Sarah warned me that my family might appeal, but with the current evidence, their chances of winning were slim. I thanked her, Jack, Clara, and Daniel. But the person I wanted to thank most was Emily, who had stood by me through every storm. That evening, I held her and Lily tightly, feeling like I could finally breathe again. Lily, with her big round eyes and innocent smile, asked, "Daddy, are you a big boss now?" I laughed, ruffling her hair. "Not quite, sweetheart. I'm just trying to do the right thing." But deep down, I knew the weight of responsibility pressing on my shoulders. I was now the chairman of Harrington Energy, with 51% of the shares and a company teetering on the brink of collapse. My grandfather's legacy was in my hands, and I couldn't fail. Returning to Harrington Energy's Manhattan headquarters after 2 years was a surreal experience. The skyscraper with its gold-plated H logo still stood as imposing as ever, but the atmosphere inside had changed. The hallways, once filled with chatter and laughter, were now quiet, with employees lowering their heads as they passed me, their eyes brimming with suspicion and fatigue. The company's stock had plummeted 60% in 2 years. Major partners had pulled out, and competitors were seizing market share. Internally, chaos reigned, with factions still loyal to my father, Elizabeth, or Charles. I knew I wasn't welcomed, not as a savior, but as an outsider daring to step into their kingdom. On my first day, I called a board meeting. As I entered the conference room, I faced familiar faces: my father, Elizabeth, Charles, Margaret, and a few major shareholders. The air was thick with tension, as if I'd walked into an undeclared war. My father sat at the head of the table, his eyes cold as though I were a traitor. Elizabeth wore a fake smile, but I noticed her fingers gripping her pen tightly. Charles muttered something under his breath, while Margaret looked at me with an unreadable expression. I took a deep breath, stood tall, and began. "I know many of you don't want me in this chair, but I'm not here for revenge or power. I'm here to save Harrington Energy, for my grandfather, for his legacy, and for everyone who's ever believed in us." I laid out the company's dire situation: hundreds of millions in losses from my father's risky investments, contracts canceled due to Charles's conflicts with partners, and Margaret's ineffective marketing campaigns. I didn't accuse, just presented the facts, but I saw my father's face flush, Elizabeth's lips tighten, and Charles slam the table. "You think you can do better than us, Tom?" Charles growled. "You're just a kid who gave up." I looked him in the eye, my voice calm but firm. I didn't give up. I left because I didn't want to play this game of backstabbing. But now I'm back, and I'll do whatever it takes to save this company. I proposed a restructuring plan, removing disloyal staff, appointing a new team, and focusing on cutting-edge technology like next-generation energy storage. I also wanted to hire a professional CEO to assist while I took the role of chairman, ensuring a long-term vision. Some shareholders nodded, but my father stood, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can erase us, Tom? Harrington Energy belongs to this family, not just you." I looked at him, a pang of pain in my chest, but I didn't back down. "This family has been destroying it, Dad. If you truly cared, you'd support me, not fight me." The meeting ended in tension, and I knew I'd just declared war, but I had no time to hesitate. I started by meeting key employees who had stayed despite the company's decline. I listened to them, from engineers to administrative staff, and realized they hadn't just lost faith in leadership, they'd lost hope in the future. I stood before them in the company cafeteria. No suit, no prepared speech, just speaking from the heart. "I know you're tired. I know you think Harrington Energy is dying, but I'm here to say we can change that. We'll work together, not for money, but for what this company once stood for: a cleaner, better future." My words weren't magic, but I saw a flicker of light in their eyes. I brought in my team from the Brooklyn startup, young, passionate people unburdened by internal politics. We worked day and night, analyzing data, meeting partners, and developing a new, cheaper, more efficient energy storage system. I flew to Germany and Japan, securing contracts with major tech firms, convincing them Harrington Energy was still trustworthy. Emily helped me launch a media campaign emphasizing sustainability and social responsibility to rebuild the company's image. But my family didn't sit idly by. My father and Elizabeth refused to resign from the board, despite growing shareholder discontent. They spread rumors that I was leading the company to ruin, that I lacked the experience to be chairman. Charles tried to ally with a competitor, leaking internal information to undermine me. Margaret, ever cunning, appeared on television, implying I was destroying the family legacy out of selfishness. I knew they were waiting for me to fail, biding their time to overthrow me. One night, as I stayed late at the office, an old employee of my father's, a man who had worked with my grandfather, walked in. His name was Frank, an aging engineer with tired but sincere eyes. "Master Tom," he said, his voice low. "I worked with Mr. William from the beginning. He always believed you'd save this company. Don't let them shake you." Frank handed me a USB drive containing data on my father's failed investments and emails between Elizabeth and an offshore bank where she funneled profits to bolster her power. "Use it when you need to," Frank said, then left. I sat there, feeling both grateful and pained. Even those once loyal to my family had turned away. Not for me, but because they saw the company dying. With Frank's evidence, I called an emergency shareholder meeting. I presented the data without embellishment, letting the truth speak for itself. The major shareholders, already frustrated, demanded my father and Elizabeth resign immediately. My father stood, his face red, shouting, "You'll regret this, Tom." But this time, no one stood with him. Elizabeth tried to stay composed, but I saw defeat in her eyes. Charles and Margaret, seeing the tide turn, agreed to step back, though they retained small shareholdings. I didn't seek revenge. I only asked them to leave the board so I could focus on saving the company. After 18 months, Harrington Energy began to recover. The stock rose, not spectacularly, but enough to restore investor confidence. We signed a deal with a European energy conglomerate, expanded our market share in Asia, and launched a new energy storage system hailed by the media as a breakthrough in renewable energy. I hired a new CEO, Anna Patel, an Indian-American woman with experience leading major tech firms. Anna brought the professionalism and vision I needed while I focused on long-term strategy, ensuring Harrington Energy wasn't just a business but a symbol of sustainability. But this journey wasn't just about the company or the legacy my grandfather left. It was about me, about how I learned to rise from pain and betrayal. I once idealized my family, believing we could one day unite. I was wrong. My true family wasn't those bound by blood, but Emily, Lily, Daniel, and the people who believed in me when I had nothing. I didn't forgive my father, Elizabeth, Charles, or Margaret, not out of hatred, but because I needed to protect myself and my small family. I kept my distance, only communicating when necessary for work. My father and Elizabeth all but vanished from high society, while Charles and Margaret lived quieter lives, as if accepting defeat. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my office looking down at the glittering lights of New York City, I felt my grandfather's presence beside me. I remembered his words. "Leadership isn't just about power, Tom. It's about responsibility." I had done it, not to prove anything to my family, but to prove to him, to myself, that I was worthy of his trust. Harrington Energy was no longer just a company. It was a testament to what my grandfather built and what I was determined to protect. But this journey, I realized, wasn't just about saving a corporation. It was about finding myself, learning to stand tall amidst the wounds my family left behind, and understanding that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about the people who choose to stay by your side. Over 2 years after becoming chairman, Harrington Energy had regained its former glory. The stock had risen more than 40% from its lowest point. International contracts were pouring in, and our new energy storage system was hailed by tech magazines as the future of renewable energy. Anna Patel, the CEO I hired, had become my right hand, her sharpness and decisiveness helping me turn my vision into reality. But this success didn't come easily. Every step was a battle, not just with the market or competitors, but with the shadows of the past. My family, though removed from the board, remained an unhealed wound. My father, Robert, now lived in a luxurious Upper East Side apartment but no longer appeared in high society. I heard he spent most of his time playing golf and avoiding the press. Once I received a handwritten letter from him. Not an apology, but a lengthy accusation. "You've destroyed this family, Tom. You think you're a hero, but you're just selfish." I read the letter, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't angry. I was sad because I had once hoped he'd understand that I wasn't fighting to defeat him, but to save what my grandfather left behind. Elizabeth disappeared from New York, moving to London to run a small investment fund. I heard she remained bitter, telling friends I had stolen the company from her. Charles retreated to a ranch in Texas, living a quieter life, while Margaret became a consultant for an advertising firm, leveraging her cunning to rebuild her reputation. I didn't contact them, not out of hatred, but because I had learned a painful lesson. Family isn't always where you find solace. Sometimes you have to set boundaries, even if it means letting go of the dream of a united family. But not everything was loss. Emily and Lily were my light, the reason I woke up each day with hope. Emily, with her intelligence and warm heart, was not just my wife, but my irreplaceable partner. She helped me through the darkest days, from being barred from my grandfather's funeral to the sleepless nights worrying about the trial. She continued her work as an environmental journalist, and her articles about Harrington Energy helped us regain public trust. Lily, now 7, was an endless source of joy. Every time she drew a picture of superhero daddy standing beside wind turbines, I laughed and thought that maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. Daniel, my best friend, remained the brother I could rely on. He didn't just help with the lawsuit, he connected me with major shareholders who stood by me when my family turned their backs. Clara, my grandfather's nurse, was now retired, but I sent her gifts every Christmas as a thank you for helping me uncover the truth. And Jack, the private investigator, had become a friend, occasionally stopping by for coffee and sharing stories about his new cases. But above all, this journey was about me, about how I had changed. I used to idealize my family, believing that one day we'd sit around a dinner table laughing like in the old photos. I thought I could please my father, convince Elizabeth, or earn the respect of Charles and Margaret. I was wrong. My family wasn't the one I dreamed of. They chose power, money, and rivalry over kinship, and I learned to accept that, not with bitterness, but with peace. I didn't forgive them to reconcile, but to free myself. My story doesn't end here because my grandfather's legacy never stops. Each day I continue to work, not just to keep Harrington energy strong, but to ensure that Lily's generation inherits a cleaner, fairer world. I no longer seek my family's approval. I don't need them. I have Emily, Lily, and my grandfather's belief in me, enough to keep moving forward.